beyond parody. Mom who survived China's Cultural Revolution calls critical race theory America's Cultural Revolution.
Growing up in South China, all this seemed very familiar. Communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race.
Yeah, and there was another woman.
Florida Board of Education bans critical race theory from being taught in public schools. This woman, Keisha, shared her thoughts about the dangers of critical race theory for her family and our country.
I have personally heard teachers teaching CRT and thought it would be a great idea to separate students by race. CRT is a teaching that there is a hierarchy in society where white, male, heterosexual, able-bodied people are deemed the oppressor, and anyone else outside of that is oppressed.
Yeah, there was a big debate that kind of burst into the mainstream, which has been simmering around on very online people, and then it simmers and boils into the media types, and now it's kind of burst into the mainstream about critical race theory, which we've talked a lot about here on the show. And a Chinese woman and a black woman came out against it, and the videos went viral. And so then immediately there was this huge pushback, and everyone's like, what's the big deal? It's CRT. It's not being pushed. It's not being pushed in the schools. And they're trying to say that the argument is, oh, these Republicans just don't want to teach racism, the history of racism in America, and they don't want to teach history. That is disingenuous and a lie. You should push back against that argument. It's not true. What they're pushing back against is teaching kids that the immutable color of their skin is what matters, and that every single interaction is about power and should be transactional. It is not some kind of power play. Like, that is not correct, and it's not good. And there's absolutely no evidence that any of this kind of diversity training or rhetoric actually makes anything better. If you listen to this week's episode of Walk-Ins Welcome with Jonathan Haidt, he talks a lot about this, about how there's no study or evidence anywhere. And in fact, they find that it makes, shockingly, dividing people up by race and making them think about their color makes things worse.
Yeah.
I can't believe that making everyone obsessively focus on their identity, race, their gender, and sexuality is making things awkward. Please stop making this not parody.
Our next story is a perfect example of this because everything is racist. Youth protest group inspired by Greta Thunberg disbands, accuses itself of racism. So I read this article, and it's basically like it was these kids inspired by Greta to
New Zealand, a very white nation primarily,
to form, a climate change activism group, and they did bunch of marches over the years, but then they didn't want to go to school. Fair enough. They were basically like, we've realized that we haven't listened to the BIPOC voices in our society, and since climate change affects them the most, they should be the ones leading the charge.
This is like the insane bullshit of how absurd and stupid and ridiculous this stuff gets, where it's a bunch of white people who basically go, we've reflected on our privilege and we decided the minorities need to clean this mess up.
Since they're the ones who are the worst affected, they should really be in charge of fixing this problem.
Hey, minorities, we've reflected on our privilege and we think you need to do this work.
So we're going to disband this group that came together to fight one thing for other reasons, and now no one gets to fight.
Well, and I
change.
wonder what I would like to interview those kids and see. They're like, oh, thank God. I really hated those meetings. I would like to know if it made the kids somewhat disillusioned. You know, they were like all excited about this movement. They're like, yeah, let's save the world. And then someone was like, you know what? There's too many white people caring about this. You guys need to reflect on your privilege. And they're like, all right, we are gonna let the BIPOC people save the world.
Yeah,
we're just gonna chill at home and watch Netflix.
But no, they probably feel bad, and they're like, "Oh, I feel so bad about myself," and like
I'm gonna go sit on my couch and hate myself while I let like the people of color have to clean up,
and the earth gets destroyed while I can't do anything to fight for it. It's just so weird to me that this is it's eating itself.
I hope that it eats itself. That's the only way this burns it out. I really do hope that everyone's like, this is so stupid.
Yeah.
We all we have common humanity.